everybody. So I just saw from Sargon's new video that of course he's gonna do another piece and just believe in what Western propaganda is going to say about China without using his head basically. And of course, it's called China's COVID-19 lies, right? because because they now know that after so many months of China telling people what the actual timeline was, and they have no evidence to the contrary, they now have to make up something basically based on the actual facts. And of course, they're gonna spin smear this, and I'm gonna go through this to show you guys how they're spinning smear China this time. Now, keep in mind though, um, when it comes to diagnosing the disease, you have to realize the following things. One is that if it's a novel disease, it's going to take a little bit of time before it's going to get detected and diagnosed as a novel disease. So when it comes to COVID-19, the problem with this disease is that it has flu-like or pneumonia-like symptoms. So people, were likely to misdiagnose it as seasonal flu or pneumonia. And we know that for many people who contract this virus, um, it could just be like a flu, very bad flu, and they get over it and they recover. The problem with this virus that we didn't know until now is that it has a long incubation period, and the symptoms are also not as severe as SARS or as other virus outbreaks. So this is what makes it so dangerous, and also it seems to thrive within the human body, where something like SARS, it doesn't have the conditions, not fit enough in a human population, so eventually just dies off on its own. Whereas COVID-19 doesn't seem to do that. So just keep that in mind. And another thing that this article kind of is basing on is that they keep harping on, and you'll see they keep harping on about this. China keeps saying that there's no evidence of human-to-human transmission. I was actually keeping track of this the entire time when they were outputting all these news, right? Because I had, colleagues calling me like, did you know about the virus from Wuhan? And you need to, be vigilant about it. Maybe it's going to spread to the US. And I was keeping, I was in a loop on this. And the accusation was there was a lot of evidence that it has human-to-human transmission, but China kept saying that there's no conclusive evidence. And the reason why there's a discrepancy is that the accusation that there were clear evidence of human-to-human transmission versus China saying that there hasn't been is the difference between a solid scientific investigation versus a circumstantial evidence. So the circumstantial evidence were, well, these incidents of COVID-19 emerged. Those are basically all the evidence that they're going to say it's human-to-human transmission. And even though that we don't actually know, I mean, even if it's human-to-human transmission, I'm talking about this is way back when, we don't know how it's transmitted. For example, AIDS is transmitted via sexual intercourse, which means that, if you just wear a condom, or if you just if you just participate in abstinence, then you'll be fine. You won't contract AIDS. So all of these things, like, you have to keep in mind as you go through this, how they're gonna spin smear this. So on China's side, they're basically saying that we're conducting a solid scientific investigation, and throughout the dates while they're doing this, they're saying that right now we haven't had an actual evidence that it's transmitting. And the reason why they keep saying this is because of the long incubation period. The long incubation period that we now know is because of the solid scientific investigation from China that we even discovered that this thing has an incubation period for something like 2 weeks, up to 2 weeks. So if you were to tell people, even when there were no conclusive evidence that it's definitely human-to-human transmittable, it's very bad, these information could potentially lead to very bad results in terms of action. So this is why you have to follow standard medical procedures, which is what they did. But, let's just take a look at this. So what they claim is that on December 6th, according to the study in the Lancet, the symptom onset date of the first patient identified was December 1st, 2019. I'm not exactly sure why they put it December 6th here. I'm not sure where this comes from. But if you take a look at this article, so let's just take a look at this article. The first thing you'll notice is this article was published on January 24th, 2020. So again, I'm not sure where this December 6th thing come from, because this is like more than a month after, like almost 2 months after they say that the first case supposedly appeared. Now let's just take a look at this first case. Now this first case was actually initially said to be December 8th. That was how it was dated. It's now changed to December 1st because of the 7-day observation period. So after the 7-day observation, they submitted that this person with his wife seems to have pneumonia, basically. And then there were some cluster of pneumonia happened after that. So right now they still think, at this point, they still think that it might just be pneumonia. And then they started to notice a cluster of pneumonia cases. Now you notice that from the 8th all the way to the 25th, where now they actually had the first true diagnosis. Actually, it's the 26th is when Dr. Zhang Jixian, who's the real doctor who discovered this disease, which conveniently isn't mentioned in this article. It's about little more than 2 weeks, about 2 weeks and 4 days, which is typically the amount of time for a novel virus or novel disease to be truly detected, because this is about how long it's when it's spreading and people start to notice, right? So now they're saying that in late December, they start to notice an increase. Late December actually just means that the period between the 26th or 25th to 26th, depending on how you count this date, to the 31st, this period is where after Dr. Zhang Jixian has alerted the precinct, they send people to investigate. They do a thorough investigation, and while they were investigating, this is where Dr. Li Wenliang messaged a group of his friends. And here it says that the warning about a possible outbreak of an illness that resembled severe acute respiratory syndrome. Actually, if you read the link that I provided, it actually shows a screenshot of what he actually wrote. And what he actually wrote was really just the investigators diagnosed 7 cases of SARS. So it was basically misinformation. I don't know if I would call it completely false, because COVID-19 and SARS are genetically related, but they're not the same disease. And because SARS and COVID-19 are, the characterization of the disease are different, because SARS would be much more serious in terms of deaths, So to say that it's SARS would most likely create a panic. Okay. So now, after they did that, they submitted the report to WHO, and they were in contact with WHO throughout this entire process later on. But the report then has said that, well, so far there hasn't been any obvious human-to-human transmission, and this is true. Why is this true? Because we now know the incubation period is very long, and also we know this other thing, which is that the detection of COVID-19 is very difficult. This is why China is emphasizing the world to test frequently. So not just testing somebody once, but testing somebody multiple times. If you go on to Daniel Dumbrill's channel, he interviewed a doctor from Wuhan who kept emphasizing this, and he's not the only one. I keep hearing this. He keeps saying that you have to test, and he said that sometimes you test 5 or 6 times before a true detection of COVID-19. So this is also why in China they set up different points in all throughout China, in different places in Wuhan and elsewhere, that you go anywhere that's supposed to be crowded, they test you. Basically, it's just a constant testing because it's a very hard to detect virus and with a long incubation period. So this is why they were having a difficult time drawing this conclusive evidence. However, the disease is now emerging, and so now, of course, they are going to put this in, which is that Dr. Li Wenliang got a little bit of trouble, and they basically told him to sign a statement, and basically says that you had a misconduct, which technically he did. Because he released sensitive medical information on a private server, and the information was also misinformation, and this was actually what eventually prompted the authorities to ask them to destroy the samples, because they don't trust the samples anymore. They're saying that you were telling me it's SARS, somebody says it's not SARS, start over, basically. This is kind of what they did. But they did eventually submit a genome. Again, this is just all following standard procedure. They documented people who were leaving, but of course, again, like, what are you comparing this to? If all the misinformation regarding this is actually SARS outbreak again, many more people probably would have left, right? And right now, like, the funny thing that I observe is that in here they kept saying about, well, look at how many passengers were traveling from Wuhan or to Wuhan, or etc. There were talks regarding flights being shut down, but during this period of time, the West was accusing China of being tyrannical. They were saying that, well, why are you preventing people from leaving? This is tyrannical, right? But now it seems like at this point, this article is suggesting that they should have done all these quote-unquote tyrannical things earlier. Okay, so now, like, they just document. By the way, all of these documentation, they came from Chinese news. So this is what I generally tell people when they say that you cannot trust China. Well, they get all the information from China and they put a spin smear on it. So it's kind of like something from China that they could use to smear China. They use it. Otherwise, they say discard it, right? Okay. So, so there's one study that says that there are human-to-human transmission, and but again, the studies has been conflicted, and so from here all the way to so January 1st all the way to eventually they like the 20th or something like that. So like a little bit less than I think it's the 20th that or is it the 23rd? So about 3 weeks. About 3 weeks during this period where they quarantined Wuhan, and eventually they managed to shut down the city. During this period of time, they were already organizing measures to if they have to shut down the entire city. So and this was during the period that you have to know that this was during the period of Chinese New Year, which means that a lot of people were not even working. So this is something like people need to keep in mind. And because this is supposed to be their break, right? I mean, even when I was told of this, I was just like, holy shit, now the doctors all have to like work now, during Chinese New Year. Which just imagine if this was, Christmas, if this was like from December 23rd all the way to January 5th, around this period. I can tell you from my personal experience, working as a scientist, as a researcher, people would just give you the middle finger if you start to tell them that, you have to work on something. Now, I understand that this is kind of a dire situation, but that's why they're handling it during this period of time. They're doing investigation, and they're waiting on test results. They're waiting on solid data that could tell them human transmission, and they're hoping in this period that that this isn't going to be some really bad thing, because again, this was during Chinese New Year. So, again, like the Westerners, just they're not sympathetic, you know. But this is nothing new. I mean, who gives sympathy to Chinese people anyway? They're not even human, right? So, and then they talk about the eventual tragic death of Dr. Li Wenliang, which also they got from Chinese news. Okay. So this is what I want to say. I know that people out there say, "Oh, you're just making excuses." I'm sure that there are going to be people who are accusing me of making excuses. But the thing is, we have to think about the baseline of comparison, right? So even if you're saying that, well, it doesn't matter how badly the rest of the world handled it, China still should have done this or that. But it's kind of like saying that somebody managed to win the marathon race, and you said that that person could have been faster. That person could have been faster to go to the finish line if the person didn't do this or that. Because we know that this response is faster than the West. It's faster than the previous virus outbreaks, much faster actually. It's much faster than the response to SARS. It's much faster than the other outbreaks such as MERS, such as the swine flu in the United States. Um, when you bring this up, though, people will special plead the heck out of. They'll say, "Well, COVID-19 is different because MERS and swine flu are not very contagious." So, and they say that, oh, because this is like a SARS-like kind of a thing, so they should have responded faster, even though they have responded faster. They responded, I think, 2 months faster. You can take a look at the Nathan Rich video I've linked where he made the comparison. I believe it was 2 months faster than they had the SARS response. And this is even stated by the person by the Alex Azar, who claimed that China refused the U.S. CDC's help. But you can imagine why China would refuse to help, because China probably like, we're handling it okay, and you bringing in people from the outside is really just going to muddle things. Especially since, why should China trust the West anyhow? I mean, the West doesn't trust China, so the distrust would be mutual then, wouldn't it? Right? So, but even he said that, yeah, they are responding much faster than SARS, right? And they are responding faster than the world is responding to COVID-19, much faster. The world skipped the first few steps of detection and writing a report, investigating. They know everything already. And I'm not saying like the world should be, shutting down and quarantining everybody as soon as they got the conclusive evidence that regarding the human transmission. But again, like they could have used a timeline of China. China had what, like 20 days, depends on how you count it. Yeah, you can use 20 days to organize your quarantine. And this was 20 days when China is doing all the investigation regarding the just how much the human transmission thing is going, whether or not it will result in death, all the stuff, right? Like all the step has been skipped, when it comes to the Western world, in their knowledge about this virus, so they can take 20 days, but they took much longer than that. They took like more than 2 months before they start quarantine measures. And if you bring this up, they'll just say, well, it's China's fault anyways. So again, like, it's unfalsifiable. It's damn if you do, damn if you don't. So again, what are we even talking about here? It just seems to me like China needs to do 100% perfect job, or China is just bad, okay? Or China is just lying. Even all of these dates are documented by China, basically. This is not some Western journalists who went into, the midst of the outbreak during this time and recorded everything and leaked the documents or something like that. This is all reported by China, and none of this is a lie. China has said, we've submitted a report to the WHO, which is something that even the West cannot deny. They cannot deny this. They submitted a report on the 31st, and so the West would just say, well, you submitted a report claiming that there's no evidence to human-human transmission. That's fine. But once they submitted a report, the West should have been on alert. They should have been on watch, and they should have looked at it just like, where is there a human-to-human transmission? And if they wanted to play holier than thou, that the circumstantial evidence of the human-human transmission is good enough for the concluding that it is transmittable at a very high rate, they could have done something. Like, this is like, damn if you do, damn if you don't. All of these reports were out, including the numbers. So the West can judge for themselves, couldn't they?